Good morning and welcome to TechCentral Impact Series. Very, very honored to have Anna Collard on the line again today. Anna is the Senior Vice President for all content strategy and evangelistic material and messaging that comes out of KnowBe4 Africa. Anna, we've had you on the line a few times and we're honored to have you again. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we very much look forward to today's conversation, quite specifically about cybersecurity and the importance of being resilient in this crazy cyber world that we're in at the moment by being mindful.
Well, thanks so much, James. It's a privilege being back here again.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I know you've been very, very busy in this crazy world, and there's a lot of material that you're sharing with us at the moment, and there's a lot going on in the cyber world, and there's a lot to think about. But actually, that's why we're here to have today's conversation, is because we're confusing often the amount of activity that's happening in the workplace with productivity. And I think a lot of the susceptibility of ransomware, hack, other attacks that may incur in the workplace are actually as a result of people being a bit too busy. Where do we take this topic, and how do we become more mindful about our engagement in this crazy cyber world of ours?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, thanks for having me, on about this topic, because it's actually something that I'm personally really interested in. And I'll tell you a little story why. I've been in cybersecurity for like over 20 years, and my focus is creating training content to help people spot phishing emails and not fall for scams and all of that. So that's my job. But a couple of months ago, I was sitting in an Uber car because my own car was in for a service, and it was already after dark, so the driver dropped me off in Claremont. And while I was still sort of, sitting in the car, packing my bags, talking to the driver, looking outside what was going on, I also checked my emails. Bad idea, because in that moment, I actually received a Uber phishing email, which luckily it was just a simulated email that our IT department sent out. But for some reason, the email wasn't even hard to spot. Like if I showed it to you today, you'd see, okay, they're trying to put pressure on me by saying, your account will be suspended unless you verify your details. A typical sort of phishing social engineering scam, which I really should not fall for. But in that moment, I clicked on it. And then as like a consequence or punishment, or however you want to look at it, I had to take training that I developed myself a couple of years ago. So the thing is that it wasn't the lack of training that made me click on it. It was something else. And when I looked at it properly, I thought, okay, well, I did it because I was distracted, and I was in what I call my squirrel brain, doing a million things at the same time, not really paying attention to anyone in particular, and that's when we make mistakes. And the interesting thing is that our IT guys actually sent out a survey afterwards, and they said, well, what were you doing when you failed this test? And I said, well, this is really interesting data, because a lot of my colleagues who should also know better, that's our business. We train people in not falling for these things. Yet they still fall for, or they fail these phishing tests. And 53% of my colleagues, when they failed them, did so exactly like I did, not because they didn't know maybe, that there wasn't a lack of training. They did so because they were distracted, they were multitasking and too busy. And that I thought was such an interesting, like case to look at a bit deeper and say, well, but that then means apart from just providing training content and helping people how to spot these things, we actually also have to work on the root cause, which is, well, this busyness and multitasking. And I looked in some further research. It was just not just us internally, but there was a report done by Tessian, I think, in 2020 that also confirmed about half of the cases when people fall for a con or a scam or a phishing email, they do so because they're distracted and multitasking. So, and then multitasking, is something that I then looked into a bit more in depth, and it really is the enemy. It's so bad for us, yet we all do it for a lot of reasons.
That's the intelligence behind what they're trying to achieve, because they are outwitting us because we're overloaded. And that cognitive overload leads to us, and as a result of multitasking, leads to us making all sorts of mistakes. One of the things it definitely leads to, and there's plenty of research showing this as well, is burnout. And that's a major concern. And I think most organizations don't really associate security as a direct benefit to the employee's wellness or employee wellness, but they usually brand employee wellness as productivity or employee engagement. And actually, bringing that wellness and bringing people back and centering people, centering your staff, centering the people that have access to your systems, centering the people who are using and engaging with you as an organization, and maybe it's an internal but also an external thing to a large extent, is going to help reduce that element of burnout, bring back that focus, reduce tiredness, but arguably, and most importantly, that's why we're having this conversation, reduce the risk to your organization by allowing them to think before acting.
Exactly. And, that then led me to really look into it from a human point of view related to cybersecurity and what makes us vulnerable. In IT or technology, you always talk about vulnerabilities and how do we patch them. Well, the human layer is such an important layer of the defense program. I mean, it doesn't matter which report you look at, it always starts off with, the most popular attack vector is still a phishing email or social engineering attack. So the people, unfortunately, and I hate that term that they're the weakest link, because they're not, but they're definitely in the firing line of the attackers, because the attackers know it's easier to trick me. I'm a human, I'm not a robot, than trying to break through sophisticated technology. So when we look at it from... Yes, and then if we define it, in terms of, okay, what are our inherent vulnerabilities? There are really three, and I'll try and take them back to the story of what happened to me in the car, falling for that phishing email. The first one is the fact that our lives are so much more, like you mentioned, cognitive overload. Like we are expected to do all these things at the same time. Apparently, if I compare it to the 80s, we get bombarded with 8 times more information. It probably is even more. And we somehow get programmed to be able to focus here, respond to your WhatsApp, like multitask all the time. And the reality is that multitasking is a myth. It's actually really bad for our long-term and short-term memory. And it can also, like you mentioned, it can actually end up or result in burnout and anxiety and really negative mental health kind of connotations to it. The second one is that, and this is where the social engineers are, really hooking us, is by using emotional messaging. So in my case, the email said, well, we will suspend your account unless you verify it. That is anxiety provoking. It's a low grade form of fear. Obviously, don't worry about my Uber account that much, but it is like it's a low grade form of anxiety. And what happens is when we are anxious or fearful, we still respond, or our bodies respond like we did way back when we had to run away from saber-toothed tigers. So the amygdala, which is our fear center in the limbic brain, when that gets triggered, it then activates a cortisol, or like sort of a stress response in our body. And that literally hijacks our critical thinking. So a cyber criminal, what they would want to do is, they're very lucky if they can catch us in a distracted state and then activate an emotional response. And by the way, that could be positive or negative. It could be fear, like I had that, or it could be flattery. I saw your profile. There's an amazing job offer. And then the third vulnerability, by the way, is that even when we're not stressed, even when we're not distracted or multitasking, just by pure efficiency saving, our brains operate in like what's called the system 1 thinking mode, or the fast thinking brain mode, where we come to conclusions very quickly that are not always necessarily the correct ones. That happens all the time. And unfortunately, that's where they then hook us with, for example, a false looking domain. So you might read Uber with to use, and your quick thinking brain will correct it automatically without you being aware of, this could be like, this looks dodgy. So those three realities of being, a human, or of the human existence, really make us more susceptible to cyber criminals.
And let's unpack it a bit more practically. Being mindful, and I spend a lot of time trying to be mindful, sometimes more effectively than others. I do meditate, I do yoga, I do Pilates, That's what I do. And I find that those are the sort of measures that are very useful to help center me, bring focus to me. Maybe you could be a bit more practical to our listeners and give some examples of how they could be a bit more practical about mindfulness in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can tap into modalities like yoga and mindfulness practices, that's amazing. But for some people, that's just not their thing, you know, and then we just have to remember that there are some very quick, and mindfulness doesn't require an hour of meditation. Yeah, mindfulness is literally just the ability to come back into the present moment. Because what happens when we are anxious, for example, then we are worrying about something that might happen in the future. So we're not in the present moment. When I get nervous before public speaking, for example, then I'm feeling a social fear that the audience might not accept me or might not respect me. And that's like one of the human's worst fears, is that social outcast. So it again activates a fear response and anxiety. So by coming back into the present moment and removing that story in our head, we are more mindful. And the best way of doing that is by tapping into our senses. So a very easy trick would be to just feel your feet on the floor, by breathing, you know, just by focusing on your breath. All it does really is to get you to focus on something that's happening right here and right now. So to get away from your story. Another good technique, by the way, that I use a lot when my brain goes into overdrive, because I think I do have a bit of ADD. I try and observe my thoughts from the outside, like, for example, a cat would do if it's sitting in front of a mouse hole. And every thought is like a mouse that runs around. And what happens is, if you intentionally try and catch your next thought, there's no more thought. It's really incredible how just by trying to figure out, okay, what will I think of next? Then there's like that second of quietness, and it actually brings you back into the moment. So those are all techniques that might work. Another really good one you could do in the office is, and I've seen people do it, and actually I also want to do it, is put a sticker of a black dot on the wall behind your computer. And this is actually yeah, it's like, I'm sure you've heard of the candle gazing technique, where you ask people to just look at the candle flame. We can't really do that in offices, but we can look at that black dot for as long as possible, you know, until your eyes, without blinking, and until your eyes are tearing. And then you close your eyes, and then you try and still find that black dot with your eyes closed, and you try and focus it. Like, it will move around. It's quite funny. It will move around, so you try and focus it to keep it on where it was. And just doing that for a minute before you have a meeting, if you want to, you know, dive into a big document or something, that will really help. And then obviously breath work. I mentioned that a lot. There's so many breath techniques that are actually very simple to do, and that really help us to ground ourselves and focus.
And the stigma around taking a breath, stepping back from your desk, closing your eyes for a minute, breathing, exercising, getting out into nature, taking your shoes off and just going and walking over the lawn outside the office. There's somewhat of a stigma to that. And I think it's important to eradicate that, because you'll find that if you engage with someone who is practicing mindfulness in whatever way, shape, or form, and it also applies to, you mentioned breathing, it also applies to eating healthily and exercising. If people are doing that and they come back into the workplace a better, more useful, more productive individual, would you not rather they were doing that?
Yeah, 100%. And again, you know, it's that, like you mentioned, it really is a stigma. It's sort of, the busier we are, the cooler we seem to be, when in reality, and you mentioned it, you know, that all this activity is not necessarily productivity. And I find personally, if I'm able to leave my phone, you know, on my desk, and I walk to the coffee shop without my phone, and I just literally, I walk and I walk, that's all I do. And then I look the coffee man in the eye, and I focus on him, and I just take one thing at a time. I slow things down, and by slowing things down, I do become automatically more mindful. And ironically, I then get so much more done as a result of that.
A word used a few times is aware. And I think that's what brings back to cybersecurity. Be aware of what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how you're doing it. Don't just click, 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 or walk around staring at your phone and walk into a lamppost. Don't ignore the person who's making you coffee. Actually be present.
Yes, and that's the funny thing is we talk about cyber security awareness, but it actually is awareness of life and of the present moment. So
Yeah.
there's like a link there that that I find is quite fascinating. And again, taking it back to cyber, we talk about building a culture of cybersecurity, and generally I always say, happy people are safer people. Or if you're mindful, you're more careful. So it will result in less mistakes and less human error, and ultimately also in higher productivity for your business in general, and then less clicks, on phishing emails.
Less of the wrong clicks.
Yeah.
I read an article of yours. You clearly said happier, healthier, safer. And
Yeah.
I think in the workplace, that's such a good set of words to remember. And the safer bit is, again, bring it back to security,
Yes.
avoiding making those mistakes, avoiding the obvious attacks
And
by being
maybe
mindful.
something, if I can, I don't know if I can show it here if we have the time, but there's because we recognize that at KnowBe4, we partnered with a company called the Zensory, and what it is, it's just a little app that allows you to take a minute or 3 minute breaks during the day, and you can sort of, there's different modalities, and one of them is actually listening to nature sounds with binaural beats. So binaural beats that's music that uses different frequencies, for each different ear, and that also again forces you to get into the moment. And I do that actually also before a meeting. I plug into that, and then I just doodle on my phone. You see here,
Yeah.
you can probably not hear the music, but it's very relaxing. And you do that for a minute or so, and then your brain actually goes up into a higher, like an alpha state, and not in this frazzled kind of multitasking state that let's face it, we all do it. It's just the reality of life. Like, we have these distractions, we can't run away from them all. But by using these little tricks in between, it does help you to get more grounded and centered.
I love that because you're using technology. No one's had to stand up in the middle of the room and do a downward dog yoga pose
You could do that.
or any other. Any, I often do a thing called qigong, which is a
Yeah,
yoga movement of swinging one's arms,
yes,
and
that's really good.
it does all sorts of things. Yeah, look it up as listeners. It's one of the most highly recommended body movements in yoga. It encourages breathing and circulation, and it releases all sorts of toxins in your system, and it's how I focus. I did it before today's session.
And you
So
know what is so fascinating? Oh, sorry.
no, I'm just saying the fact that you've got a mobile phone in your hand, and often you're sitting in a meeting with a mobile phone next to you, which is a bad habit in itself. If you've got access to the app Zensory, no one is judging you for standing up in the middle of the room and doing downward dog. You're actually just focusing on something else for a second so that you come back a better person, more mindful.
Yes, exactly. No, I
Right?
love it. But the Qigong part, what is really fascinating about that, or movement in general, is that from a neuroscience point of view, and this is actually such a nice analogy that Dr. Laurie Rauch, he's a sports scientist here at UCT, and he really is looking into the whole mind-body connection. And he actually lost his leg in an accident, and that made him really deep dive into healing in general. And particularly Qigong helped him a lot to heal himself. And he says what happens is, if you look at like a predator, like a lion or an elephant, the way these animals move, because they're not scared, they don't have enemies, is they move very slowly out of their spine. Whereas if we look at humans, we should also be an apex predator. We don't really have natural enemies. We just all look down on our phones the whole time. So one of the best things you can do in the morning, and it actually releases oxytocin, serotonin, like positive hormones or feel good hormones, is by moving your spine. And that could just be a forward fold, or the qigong movement where you just moving your arms around. And it actually there's a scientific evidence that it
Yes.
has nothing to do with yoga. It's scientifically proven that your anxiety and your negative emotions can be balanced by doing these positive sort of releasing those positive hormones. And by the way, one mini qigong you could do even sitting on your desk. I mean, it's better when you stand up, is by just moving your arms, like with each exhale, you move your arms out to the side, you're breathing in positivity, you're breathing out, pushing the air away from you, you're breathing in positive energy, and you can just do that a few times, and you'll see it will make you feel better and more relaxed.
And I love it. I think we're going to create a movement. I think that by bringing people's attention to themselves and allowing them to focus more and allowing them to see that the distractions that we're currently all facing, and what is the word to use, cognitive overload, is going to lead to such a risk in us being distracted that we do need to be cognitive about what we are and are not doing. And I love how you've weaved in mindfulness into cybersecurity. I think the opportunity cost of not doing mindfulness in the workplace is huge. And I really hope, and I encourage all of our listeners here at TechCentral to engage you further at KnowBe4 Africa, but also just to go out there and explore some of the things we've been talking about, but any of the ways in which you especially, but also your staff and your colleagues and your partners and your clients can just be a little bit more centered in order to avoid some of the nasty gremlins that are out there trying to attack. So there we do have some predators. So from me, James Rasmus at TechCentral, Anna Collard, thank you very, very much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks so much, James. And thanks everyone for listening.